She was the new girl in town, and she stole my heart. I saw her for the first time on a Tuesday morning when the autumn leaves were falling like copper rain, and she was standing in the doorway of the small coffee shop on Maple Street, with her dark hair catching the sunlight in a way that made my heart forget how to beat properly. She had this leather jacket slung over one shoulder, worn jeans that looked like they'd traveled 1,000 miles, and eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies of secrets I desperately wanted to discover. I didn't know then that she would become the reason. I'd rewrite everything I thought I knew about myself, about love, about the courage it takes to reach for something beautiful when you've spent your whole life playing it safe. My name is Riley, and I'd lived in this small town my entire 23 years. I worked at my family's bookstore, dated the same person through high school and college, until we both admitted we were just going through the motions, and I had convinced myself that this quiet, predictable life was enough. I told myself that the restlessness I felt every morning was just part of being young, that the way my chest felt tight when I watched romantic movies was normal, that everyone felt like they were waiting for something they couldn't name. I'd learned to ignore the flutter in my stomach when certain women walked by, the way my eyes lingered a second, too long on the curve of a smile, or the grace of movement. I'd buried those feelings so deep that I almost believed they didn't exist. Then Maya walked into my life like a storm, breaking through years of carefully constructed walls. She came into the bookstore 3 days after I first saw her at the coffee shop, and I watched her fingers trail along the spines of poetry books with a tenderness that made me ache. She smelled like jasmine and rain, and when she looked up and caught me staring, she smiled this crooked, knowing smile that suggested she could see right through every defense I'd ever built. She asked me if I had any recommendations for someone who was trying to find herself in a new place, and my voice came out shakier than I intended when I handed her a collection of Mary Oliver poems. Our fingers touched during the exchange, and I swear the world tilted slightly on its axis. Maya had moved to town to escape something, though she didn't say what at first. She'd taken a job at the community center teaching art classes to kids, and she lived in a small apartment above the vintage record store on 3rd Avenue. She started coming to the bookstore every few days, always lingering, always finding reasons to talk to me about books and music and the strange magic of small towns that felt both suffocating and safe. We developed this rhythm, this dance of almost friendship, that felt charged with something neither of us acknowledged out loud. She told me about growing up in the city, about her family who didn't understand her, about the girlfriend who'd broken her heart so thoroughly that she'd had to leave everything behind to remember who she was, without the pain. I listened to her stories and felt something awakening inside me that I'd spent years trying to keep dormant. Every time she laughed, I felt my carefully ordered world shifting. Every time she looked at me with those deep brown eyes that seemed to see all the things I was afraid to say, I felt the walls I'd built around my heart developing cracks. I started looking forward to her visits with an intensity that scared me. I found myself choosing my clothes more carefully on the days I thought she might come in. I caught myself daydreaming about what it would feel like to touch her hand deliberately, not by accident, to trace the line of her jaw, to know what her lips tasted like. The turning point came on a Friday evening in late October, when the town was preparing for the Harvest Festival. Maya invited me to help her set up the art booth she'd organized for the community center kids, and I said yes before my brain could manufacture a reason to decline. We worked side by side as the sun set, hanging children's paintings and arranging clay sculptures, and the whole time I was hyper-aware of every accidental brush of our arms, every moment our hands reached for the same thing. When we finished, she suggested we walk through the festival together, and suddenly we were wandering through the crowd with the lights strung overhead, casting everything in gold, and she bought us both hot apple cider, and it felt like a date even though neither of us said that word. We ended up sitting on a bench at the edge of the festival grounds where the noise faded to a gentle hum, and Maya turned to me with this expression that was half vulnerable, half brave, and asked me if I'd ever felt like I was living a life that didn't quite fit. The question hit me like a physical thing, and before I could stop myself, I was telling her everything. I told her about the confusion I'd felt for years, about the relationships that felt like playing a role, about the fear that had kept me silent and small. I told her that since she'd walked into my life, I'd been feeling things I'd convinced myself I wasn't allowed to feel, wanting things I'd taught myself not to want. The silence after I finished speaking felt enormous, and I was terrified that I'd said too much, revealed too much, ruined whatever fragile thing existed between us. But then Maya reached over and took my hand, and her touch was warm and solid and real, and she said that she'd been hoping I might feel the same way because she'd been falling for me since the moment I'd handed her that poetry book with shaking hands. She said she recognized herself in me, the scared parts and the hopeful parts, and she wanted to know if I'd be brave enough to explore what this could be. My heart was thundering so hard I could barely breathe, and every instinct I'd developed over 23 years was screaming at me to pull back, to make an excuse to retreat into safety. But I looked at Maya's face in the festival lights, at the hope and fear mixing in her eyes, and I realized that some chances only come once. I realized that I could spend the rest of my life wondering what if, or I could be brave for just one moment, and reach for something that felt more real than anything I'd ever known. So I squeezed her hand and said yes, I wanted to try. I wanted to see where this could go. Even though I was terrified and had no idea what I was doing, the weeks that followed were both the most exhilarating and the most challenging of my life. Maya and I started seeing each other, though we were careful at first, feeling our way through this new territory. She was patient with my uncertainty, with the moments when fear made me pull back, with my inexperience navigating this kind of relationship. She kissed me for the first time under the oak tree behind the bookstore, and it was soft and gentle and felt like coming home to a place I'd never known I'd been missing. But along with the joy came the hard reality of living authentically in a small town, where everyone knew everyone, where difference was noticed and sometimes judged. I struggled with whether to tell my parents, how to handle the curious looks from longtime customers, what to say when old friends asked questions. There were days when the fear almost won, when I considered telling Maya that it was too hard, that I wasn't ready, that maybe we should just be friends. But then she'd show up at the bookstore with coffee and that crooked smile, or send me a text with a poem she thought I'd like, or pull me into her arms and make me feel like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I'd remember why I was doing this. I was doing it because love, real love, the kind that sees all of you and wants you anyway, is worth fighting for. I was doing it because living a half-life of pretending was slowly killing something essential inside me, and Maya had shown me what it felt like to be fully alive. The real test came when my parents found out. My mother saw Maya and me holding hands as we walked through town, and the conversation that followed was one of the hardest things I'd ever endured. There were tears and confusion and questions I didn't have perfect answers for. My father was silent in a way that felt worse than anger, but I stood my ground in a way I'd never done before. I told them that I loved Maya, that she made me happy in a way I'd never been happy before, that I was finally being honest about who I was. I told them that I needed them to try to understand, but that I couldn't go back to hiding and pretending, not anymore. The days after that conversation were painful. My parents needed time, and I had to give them that space while also holding on to the truth I'd finally claimed. Maya was there through all of it, steady and strong even when I was falling apart. She reminded me that coming out is a process, that some people need time to adjust, that their initial reaction didn't have to be the final word. She shared her own stories of family struggle and eventual acceptance, of friends who surprised her with their support and others who disappointed her. She helped me see that I was building a life based on authenticity, and that was worth the temporary pain. Gradually, things began to shift. My mother called and asked if she could meet Maya properly. My father showed up at the bookstore and awkwardly asked how I was doing. Some friends surprised me with their immediate acceptance and support, creating a circle of love around us that made the harder reactions more bearable. Maya and I grew stronger together through the challenges, learning how to communicate, how to support each other, how to build something real and lasting. She taught me that love isn't just the easy moments of passion and romance. It's also choosing each other during the hard times, showing up even when things are difficult, fighting for what you've built together. By the time winter arrived and snow began covering our small town in white, I barely recognized the person I'd been when Maya first walked into my life. I was braver, more honest, more fully myself than I'd ever been. I'd learned that coming out isn't a single moment but an ongoing process of choosing authenticity over comfort, of refusing to shrink yourself to fit others' expectations. Maya and I had built something beautiful together, a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine connection and the courage to be vulnerable with each other. We weren't perfect and the journey wasn't over, but we were building a life together that felt true and right and ours. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt that flutter of recognition or the fear of being truly seen, I'd be so grateful if you could take just a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything and helps me continue sharing stories that celebrate love in all its beautiful forms. And please share this with someone who might need to hear it, someone who's still gathering courage or someone who's already on their journey and needs a reminder that they're not alone. On a December evening, Maya and I stood in the bookstore after closing, surrounded by stories of love and adventure and transformation, and she pulled me close and said that I was the bravest person she knew. I laughed because I still felt scared most of the time, still worried about judgment and acceptance, still stumbled through this new identity I was claiming. But she kissed my forehead and said that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing love and truth despite the fear, and by that measure I was the bravest person in the world. Before we reach the end, I have a special request. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced this kind of love or you're still hoping to find it, please drop a heart emoji in the comments. Let's create a wave of love and support for everyone who's on their own journey of discovering and claiming who they truly are. I realized then that Maya hadn't just stolen my heart that autumn day when she walked into town with her leather jacket and her galaxy eyes. She'd given me the gift of seeing myself clearly for the first time, of understanding that the restlessness I'd felt my whole life wasn't dissatisfaction with what I had. It was my authentic self trying to break through years of suppression and fear. She'd shown me that love could be soft and fierce simultaneously, that vulnerability was a form of strength, that the most important relationship I could build was the one with my own truth. And as snow fell softly outside the bookstore windows and the smell of old books surrounded us like a blessing, I held Maya close and knew with absolute certainty that choosing to be brave, choosing to love her, choosing to finally live as my authentic self, was the best decision I would ever make. Some people walk into your life and change everything. And if you're lucky enough to recognize them when they arrive, if you're brave enough to reach for what they're offering, you get to discover that the truest version of love is the one where you can finally, completely beautifully be yourself.